Rev up your engines!
Ig says, who's dumber, Jim Farley or Mary Barr? Okay, that's a good toss-up. You got the CEO of Ford and the CEO of GM. Two companies that are going downhill faster than water over Niagara Falls, right? It is a toss-up. Ford has the absolute worst in recalls the last 3 years, I believe, in the United States, more recalled cars than anybody. And then GM with Mary have made so many mistakes. We're going to build electric cars. We're going to build electric cars. Now, we're not going to build them any electric cars. We're going to make a fortune with software for cars. We're getting rid of our software division because, we're not making any money on this. They came up with a brilliant idea of, let's sell people cars. Then they can buy a subscription for things they can use on the car. They already paid for the car, but you can't use all the aspects unless you pay for a subscription, right? They thought they were going to make billions on that. Guess what? When people try that to Americans are like, we bought this car. We paid good money for it. We want to be able to use everything in this car. Don't start selling me a paid subscription every year for using something, and they found out they're not going to make a dime doing that stuff because Americans don't accept that in general mass, that they paid for something, they want to be able to use it, and nickel and diamond people like that, you just chase people even further to buying higher quality Japanese cars. It says, is the new Ford Bronco a good car worth buying? Well, I would say probably not, considering that the whole bunch of them with the V6 engines, the engines all blew up because Ford, in their brilliance, instead of being vertically integrated and having all their own parts, they got valves made, I'll be someplace in Ohio, and the engine valves broke, and the engines went with as little as 500 miles, 10,000 miles, and they had to replace a bunch of engines. I really wouldn't spend that kind of money for something that's unproven. Plus, they're tremendous gas hogs. Their quality's too crappy. It's a crapshoot. Maybe you'll get one that was okay. Maybe that was one made on Wednesday when the workers weren't either hung over or thinking about weekend and partying. It's a crapshoot. You get a Toyota, it's generally not a crapshoot. You buy a Ford these days, they lead the nation in most recalled cars per year for the last 3 years. So you're taking a crapshoot buying anything they make. Mike R said, Scotty, I'm a rookie to trucks. I'm going to buy my first truck, looking to drive something till the wheels fall off. Looking for a 2022 or newer, not towing, just long drives for work. Get a Toyota Tacoma and you'll be happy. You're not towing anything, get a 4-cylinder engine in it. Those things can run 400, 500, 600,000 miles or more with very little maintenance other than changing the oil and filter. Say you got to spend 30 grand on something you like versus some pile of crap that's $24,000, right? If the 30 grand one lasts you 500,000-600,000 miles and a $24,000 one lasts you 110 and it breaks, you're not towing anything, you're going to drive it till the wheels fall off, it might outlast you because the wheels generally don't fall off of Toyota Tacomas. You might keep going and your wheels fall off and you're 6 feet under and the truck is still going down the road. Jaden says, Scotty, my Ford Ranger makes a knocking sound in between the tranny and engine under the vehicle. Makes a sound only when the truck's in drive. What can it be? All right. It could be your torque converter or your flywheel has a problem. They often will do that. The torque converter and the flywheel is right in between the engine and the transmission. So take it to a good mechanic like me and let him listen to it. And hope it's like, well, maybe the flywheel is breaking. They spot weld them. And then got to pull the transmission out, but then you'd only have to buy a flywheel. You wouldn't have to buy the whole transmission. Or you might say, well, it's the torque converter. Same thing. You got to pull the transmission off. But you don't have to replace the transmission. The torque converter bolts in there. So pray it's the torque converter or the flywheel. Could easily be. Osriff says, what do you think of a Mercedes 300D diesel, 283,000 miles, looks nice, 8 grand. I'm 16 and enjoy working on engines. What do you think? Okay, well, those 300D engines could last for many hundreds of thousands of miles. It's got 283. I've seen plenty of them with 500,000. If I were you say you're 16, you like working on cars, you're not going to have the tools. Take it to a mechanic who can do compression tests on diesel engines to see what shape the compression is in. If the compression is good and it runs and shifts okay, why not? Then you can learn about it as you go on. But if the mechanic says, now the engine's wearing out, don't buy it with a 10-foot pole, because those diesel engines are extremely hard to rebuild. And if you want to replace one, you're talking 8 to 10 grand. Get it tested out first. Stephen Campot says, I got an 01 Buick LeSabre Custom, 151,000 miles. It drives beautiful. What are your overall opinion on them? Okay, they were decent vehicles. They had a V6 engine in them that could last basically forever if you changed the oil regularly. You got 151,000 miles. You say it still drives beautiful. What the heck? If it's not rusted out, take care of it. Who knows how long it lasts? I've seen some of those things with 400,000 miles on them. I would even say if it's a beautiful car, it runs good, the engine's good. If the transmission does go out, put in a remanufactured transmission. I've had many people do that. That's the first thing that'll go out will be the automatic transmission. But if it's going good now, baby, take care of it. Who knows how long it'll last? Mizu says, Scotty, do Volvos tend to have transmission problems? I find the engine is over-revving for the speed it gives. Oh, yeah, they've had automatic transmission problems throughout their history. I mean, the original Volvos were niche cars. A lot of people bought them with manual transmissions, and they could run for 1 million miles and stuff. But those days are long gone, and they're very complex. And generally, what goes out in them is the automatic transmission. They still make pretty good engines. They're strong engines, can run a long time. But what good is it if your transmission goes out and you can't drive the car, you know? Now, you say yours over-revving. What I'd advise you to do is take it to a good mechanic who understands Volvos and let him do a little research, put his fancy scan tool on. Sometimes there's updated software that'll make it shift better, and you might just need some reprogramming. You never know. Martin White says, what do you think of using high-mileage engine oils versus regular oils? You know, I'm not a big fan of these high-mileage engine oil crap. Make your engine work longer and last longer and get better gas mileage, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. They put a few additives in. I think most of it's just smoke and mirrors, a lot of snake oil. I've always used Castrol synthetic oil. In my cars, I've never had any problems. I don't buy high mileage oil, even though I have high mileage cars. I think a lot of it's a line of baloney. I wouldn't waste my money on it myself. You know, if you got a worn out engine, you got a worn out engine. And a couple additives in oil isn't going to stop your pistons that are worn out from burning oil. That's just a fact. Jerry Lex says, Scotty, it's a good idea to buy a 95 Lexus LS400 with 7,000 miles for 24K. Well, one, there's no way in Hades I'd believe that a 95 only has 7,000 miles. And if it did, that meant it sat in storage for a long time. And 24 grand for a car that's 29 years old. All the rubber's going to be rotten. It's going to leak. It's going to have problems. It's too old. And I wouldn't believe that it had 7,000. But if it did, it sat in storage for so long. If you want an ornament to park in your driveway, go right ahead, right? But you can't every day drive a car that old, even with that low mileage, because there's so many rubber seals in a car. And they're all going to be rotten because it's just sitting there, and they're all going to leak. It's a Lexus or a Toyota or a Honda. If it's sitting for all those years, the rubber seals are going to dry up and everything. Your air conditioning system's going to break because all the rubber seals will go and the Freon will leak out, and then you got to fix that, and that can cost thousands of dollars. Racer 1952. Do you remember the Mercury Mercure? It was a rebranded European car. I believe those were made in Germany somewhere. They were a massive failure. Nobody really bought the things. They were all into this idea that GM for years was selling the Opals, and then they sold Opals as rebadged Cadillacs. Cadillac Catera was a V6 Opal. It had nothing to do with Cadillac, and they were miserable failures. And the Mercury Mercure, that was pretty much the same thing. It was a miserable failure, too. You couldn't find people to work on it because it was a German car, but it was sold by Ford, and you couldn't get parts for it because the Ford dealer said, well, it's a German car. We don't have any really parts for it. Nobody knew how to work on them. You couldn't get parts. That's a great idea for a car, right? Wells Rice in 71 says, I got a question. I got a 17 Silverado. It rattles from underneath once in drive. Chevy replaced the torque converter. Now says, it's just a heat shield. Not to worry. What should I do? Well, it's just a heat shield, right? Take the heat shield off. And if the rattle didn't go away, bring it back to them and say, you guys are morons. You told me it was a heat shield. I took it off. Now let's say you take the heat shield and the noise goes away, then just take it to a guy like me and he can just weld it on so it won't rattle anymore. But if you take it off and it still rattles, go back to him and say, you guys are full of baloney. I took the heat shield off and it's still rattling, right? But if it was, you could leave it off. A lot of guys leave the heat shields off, but then you might start a fire somewhere if hot gets on it. So you could always have a guy like me weld the old heat shield back on if that's what it actually is. Karen Wall says, How do you feel about buying a motorcycle without fuel injection? Would you stay away from them? Well, I wouldn't, because I know how to rebuild carburetors. I got my first fuel-injected motorcycle. It's a Triumph Truckster, and it's got a Japanese fuel injection system. It's bulletproof, right? And I love it because it starts every time. It can sit for 6 months when I'm not using it, and then it will start right up, and I don't have to worry about the carburetor getting clogged up. See, problem with carburetors are there's very little pressure in them. The fuel pump on a motorcycle doesn't exist if you have a carbureted. If you have a fuel injected, it's still got a pump that pumps the pressure to the injector. But you got a carburetor, it's just gravity. The gas tank's there, fuel goes by gravity into the carburetor. So there's very little pressure inside the carburetor. You get any dirt, crud, the gasoline gets old and gets gooey. That little bit of pressure isn't enough to make it run right and blow through, so they'll have problems. If you don't drive your motorcycle all the time, you are better off with a fuel-injected motorcycle. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. But if you like messing with carburetors, go right ahead. You can play with it to your heart's content. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.